Hey everyone, welcome back to another cult movie review with me, Bo, here on the Film Scene Investigation channel. Thanks for checking out the video. In today's review, I'm going to be taking a look at the 1987 drama, The Principal. Before we get into it, guys, if you haven't already, please do consider subscribing to the channel. All the support is greatly appreciated. So, The Principal from 1987 was directed by the filmmaker Christopher Cain and starred the actor Jim Belushi in his first lead role. While Belushi had indeed appeared alongside some big-name talent in other films, he was generally considered to be a supporting actor. When it came to The Principal, this was Belushi's first real opportunity to lead a movie and showcase his dramatic side along with his comedic talents. When it comes to the supporting cast, the movie included the likes of Louis Gossett Jr., actor Michael Wright, and the actress Rae Dawn-Chong, whom I'm all familiar with. I knew actor Michael Wright from a season 3 episode of Miami Vice, and of course, who could forget Rae Dawn-Chong's performance in the Arnold Schwarzenegger classic Commando. So, when it comes to the film's plot, it followed the newly promoted school teacher Ricky Latimer, who was played by Jim Belushi, taking over as principal of Brandell High School. Brandell was a school that was run down, situated in a very dangerous part of the neighborhood, and just had a very notorious reputation. It was basically a dump, and no one in their right mind would actually want to teach there. You see, Ricky wasn't exactly thrilled with the idea of being sent to Brandell, but given his recent behavioral issues, his school's governing board decided to transfer him. Latimer was getting over a failed relationship and, his behavior had become a nuisance, and so the board felt it was best that he vacate and no longer tarnish their reputation. Latimer already knew about Brandell High and how much of a dump it was, but given that this was a new opportunity for him to actually become principal and be given more responsibility, he took the position. Even though Latimer knew about the school's bad reputation, it wasn't really until he showed up outside the school gates and discovered just how poorly run the school was. You had trash everywhere, graffiti on the walls, disrespectful students, gangs everywhere, open drug use. I mean, this was a school without any serious discipline, and Latimer knew that he had a real challenge on his hands. Now, Ricky was able to form a solid relationship with the school's head security guard, Jake Phillips, who was played by actor Louis Gossett Jr. Jake did his best to keep the students in line, but given the lack of resources the school had, his efforts basically went nowhere. He wanted to make a difference, but with so many kids on the rampage, it was pretty much impossible to maintain any discipline at Brandell High School. While Ricky wasn't exactly thrilled with the idea of being the principal of such a rundown school, given that he was there now and he was in charge, Ricky decided to make a series of policies to completely overhaul the school and make a positive impact. As the movie progressed, we saw Ricky enforce some of his new policies, like stopping open drug use and forcing all the students to attend class. But as you can imagine, the new policies weren't exactly popular with the various gang members in and around the school. the head gang leader, Victor Duncan, who was played by actor Michael Wright, took exception to these new policies and targeted the principal in an effort to drive him out of Brandell. Duncan was a dangerous individual. I mean, he was a guy that you wouldn't want to mess with. And he was basically feared by all the other students. Yet when it came to the principal, he took no notice. He stayed resilient and continued on in his pursuit to overhaul the school. Things would get serious though when Ricky was ambushed in a sneak attack by Victor and his men. Ricky was attacked from behind. He didn't even have a chance to really defend himself before he was left completely battered and bruised. Up until that point, only angry words had been exchanged between the two, but with this attack, Victor had taken things to the next level. In Victor's eyes, it was his school. He ran things, and there was going to be no newly appointed principal that was going to get in his way. But the vicious attack by Victor and his men only seemed to spur the principal on. It made him even more determined to push through his new policies. The movie culminated with Victor and his men roaming the school in an attempt to find and kill the principal. Latimer knew he was in trouble, and he did his best to keep out of sight, but eventually he was found and held at gunpoint. A fight would then break out between the two in the school hallway, a final showdown between two guys who were not going to back down. At first, Victor had the upper hand. I mean, he was the younger and stronger of the two. But Ricky was eventually able to fight back. Ricky had enough. There was no more Mr. Nice Guy, and we saw the principal knock Victor out in front of all the students who were watching on. Suddenly, the big bad gangster, Victor Duncan, was a laughingstock and no longer feared among the other students. It was fairly predictable that eventually Victor Duncan would get his comeuppance. But the way it was handled, I enjoyed it. One of my favourite scenes in the entire film was the class assembly sequence where we saw the principal announce his intentions to reform Brandell High. No more graffiti, no more drugs, no more disrespect, no more bad behaviour, just no more. You had Ricky up on stage, all alone, trying to keep some semblance of order while hundreds of disinterested kids just watched on. The scene really established just how big the school was. I mean, there were hundreds of students in this assembly, and it kind of showed the enormity of the challenge that Ricky was facing. I don't know how many extras were used for this scene, but it seemed like well over 300. I mean, there were just tons of kids there. I thought the scene was filmed very well, and it also gave us the introduction to the Victor Duncan character. Ricky tried to assert some authority, but Victor wasn't listening. I mean, he was not in a mood to follow any orders. A fight would eventually break out between all of the students, which was somewhat predictable given the hostile atmosphere inside the hall. Suddenly, these kids had an audience, and they wanted to show off, and so they did. There was just simply no respect or discipline for any of these kids to follow. It was a great scene with a very chaotic ending. When it comes to Jim Belushi and his performance, I must say, I thoroughly enjoyed it. He brought his natural charm and swagger to the role, and For me, he didn't really seem out of place as an authority figure. Going into this film, I didn't really know what to expect from Jim Belushi, as the limited times I have seen him on screen, it's usually to do with some sort of comedy or sitcom. With The Principal, while the comedy was still there, it was very muted, and I think the filmmakers made the right choice to rein in the comedy and focus more on the drama. I also liked the relationship between Ricky and Jake. You know, two guys that had each other's backs while they attempted to clean up Brandel. The two had some good on-screen chemistry together that felt genuine and not forced. So yeah, that was a definite highlight for the film. I'm also really glad that the filmmakers didn't pursue a love story between the principal and Ray Dawn Chong's character, Ms. Orozco. Given Ricky was on the rebound from his divorce, I assumed that we might get this forced relationship between the two, but luckily it was left alone, and I think the film was better off for it. I mean, there was enough going on already in the story with Victor Duncan and all the various gang members causing havoc at Brandel. We didn't need this forced, romantic subplot. So yeah, I'm really glad we didn't see it. When it comes to the actor Michael Wright, I thought he did a pretty decent job as the antagonist Victor Duncan. His character was a complete psychopath who lacked empathy for anyone but himself. With his dark clothing and his sinister voice, I thought Michael Wright owned the role, and I was very impressed. I guess there could be an argument made that the Victor Duncan character was a little too mature to be hanging around high school, but yeah, I overlooked it. And I'm glad that the Victor Duncan character would end up surviving and just got took to jail at the end, because I feel if the principal had indeed, gone over the top and actually killed Victor in front of all the students, that would have been pretty ridiculous. So I'm glad they kind of reined it in a bit there. And so, dislikes for The Principal from 1987. My biggest dislike for this film would have to be the scene in which the principal saved the history teacher, Ms. Orozco, from being sexually assaulted in her classroom. We saw the history teacher, Ms. Orozco, get attacked by one of her students who was wearing a mask, and Ricky heard what was going on and attempted to save her. Now, in terms of the storyline itself, I had no issues with, the principal coming to the aid of the history teacher and saving the day. No problem whatsoever. My issue came with the fact that we saw the principal drive his motorcycle through the various school corridors and up some staircases. He then smashed the classroom door that was locked with his bike, and yeah, he came hurling through the classroom, and I must say, I did find that pretty ridiculous. This was a serious scene, with a history teacher being sexually abused. I mean, there's nothing, funny about that. She was pinned to her desk. This crazy student in a mask was all over her. And yeah, of course, it made sense that Ricky would come and attempt to save his colleague. Just the way it was done, the way it was executed, with him, smashing through the gut. Just tonally, it felt off. And in a way, it kind of took away from the seriousness that had been built up with the sexual assault. The filmmakers shouldn't have been so bombastic with the execution, the knight in shining armor kind of deal, because the principal could have just gone on foot. Did we really need all this big, elaborate stunt work? I mean, I don't know. It just took me out of the film. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh, really? We doing this? Listen, I understand that this movie was targeted to a specific audience in mind. I mean, this movie, The Principal, was aimed at the, newly emerging MTV generation, and the filmmakers wanted to create this big, dramatic moment to, likely keep the audience interested. Yes, Ricky was an experienced motorcyclist. I mean, there's no denying that, he knew how to handle a bike. Many scenes we saw him riding around the streets. But having him ride up staircases and bursting through locked doors was somewhat of a stretch. I mean, this was something that a stuntman would do, and let's face it, Ricky was no stuntman. And so, ratings for The Principal from 1987. I'm going to be rating this movie a solid 4.5 out of 10. The Principal is very much a movie of its time. Very mid-80s, with the fashion styles and soundtrack that kind of reminded me of the TV show Miami Vice, with some of the musical montages. No joke, Belushi was a major highlight for this film, and I actually thought the supporting cast complemented his zany performance pretty well. Overall, this is a serious movie with some comedy elements added in, but I thought that the filmmakers did actually a pretty good job balancing out the tone accordingly. I don't think the movie would have become the success it did if it were an outright comedy. If you're a fan of 80s cinema and you haven't seen The Principal yet, I'd recommend it, as overall, it's definitely worth a watch. And well, that's all from me today, guys. I hope you have enjoyed this review of The Principal from 1987. I'll be back next week, of course, with another cult movie review. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And of course, take care, guys. See you next week.